The plant is watercress, and you buy it in the salad aisle of a supermarket for around $2 a bunch. You take a few stems out of the bag, put them in a glass of water on a windowsill until they root, and then sit them on the rim of your aquarium with the roots in the water and the leaves in the air. I want to be precise about the word forever because it is doing real work and it is not a slogan. This does not clear cloudy water this afternoon, and it is not an emergency measure. What it does is remove the thing your cloudiness is feeding on, permanently, so that the condition stops returning. But the plant is not the interesting part of this video. The interesting part is what cloudy water actually is, because it is not dirt, it is not particles, and your filter is physically incapable of removing it no matter what you put inside the box. Here is the cycle that plays out in a great many tanks. The water goes hazy. Not filthy, just slightly milky, and it looks wrong. So you do a big water change, it clears for 2 days and comes back. You buy a bottle of water clarifier for around $12, and this time it genuinely works, visibly, within a few hours, and you feel like you have solved it. 10 days later, it is hazy again, so you deep clean the filter, rinse all the media out, replace the pads, and add a bag of carbon. It clears. A week later, it is back, slightly worse. Somewhere in there, you start wondering whether you need a stronger filter or a UV sterilizer or fewer fish, and you have now spent real money and a great deal of Saturday morning on a problem that keeps returning on roughly a 10-day cycle, because every single thing you have done addresses what you can see rather than what is causing it. Put a figure on that year. Water clarifiers and flocculants are $8 to $15 a bottle and get bought 4 or 5 times across a bad year. Carbon and polishing pads bought specifically to fix haze are another $30 to $60. A UV sterilizer, which is the step most people eventually reach, is $50 to $150 plus a replacement bulb every year at $15 to $30 because the lamp loses output long before it stops lighting up. So, a hobbyist fighting cloudy water properly is spending somewhere between $100 and $250 a year on it, indefinitely. And a $2 bunch of salad does the job permanently and grows back every time you cut it. The reason this entire category exists is worth examining, and it is not really about dishonesty. It is about the only signal a customer can actually perceive. You cannot see ammonia, you cannot see nitrite, nitrate, dissolved organic carbon, or oxygen saturation. Every genuinely important measure of aquarium health is invisible to the naked eye and requires a test kit to observe. But everybody can see clarity, instantly, from across a room, with no equipment. So clarity became the proxy for health, both in shops and in living rooms, and an entire product category grew up around making water look correct rather than making it be correct. Those two things are not the same. A tank can be crystal clear with nitrate at 80 parts per million, and a filter running at a fraction of its capacity. A tank can be very slightly hazy and be in excellent condition. That is not a scandal. And almost every consumer category on Earth optimizes for the signal the customer can perceive. What matters is that the products in this particular category are all designed to act on the visible symptom, and none of them are designed to remove the cause, which is precisely why the problem comes back on a schedule. And a product that resolves a visible problem within hours and lets it return within days is, from a commercial point of view, close to perfect. The customer sees the result with their own eyes, which means the product has demonstrably worked, and there is no argument about whether it was worth the money. Then the problem returns, which means the customer buys it again, and buys it with confidence, because it worked last time. Nobody has to design that outcome deliberately, for it to be the outcome that survives on a shelf. Before I get into the mechanism, one thing worth saying now. Clarity is one output of a system with several inputs, and your feeding, stocking, filtration, and maintenance routine all determine what is dissolved in your water in the first place. I have put the complete version together in one place as a full aquarium playbook, covering how every layer supports the others. The link is in the description and in the top pinned comment. And if the code is on your screen right now, you can scan it and go straight there. Now, here is what is actually happening in cloudy water, and it is the single most misunderstood thing in this hobby. That haze is not dirt suspended in your water. It is alive. In the overwhelming majority of cases, a milky white or gray cloudiness is a bacterial bloom, meaning an enormous population of free-floating heterotrophic bacteria multiplying in the water column. These are not the nitrifying bacteria in your filter, which live fixed to surfaces. These are a different group entirely. They feed on dissolved organic carbon, and when there is a surplus of dissolved organic compounds in the water, they reproduce explosively because bacteria double in minutes rather than hours. A green tint is the same story with a different organism, in that case free-floating single-celled algae feeding on dissolved nutrients and light. In both cases, you are not looking at debris, you are looking at a population. If you have ever set up a brand new tank, watched it turn milky white around day 3, panicked slightly, and then watched it clear completely on its own by the end of the first week without you doing anything at all, you have already run the definitive experiment. Nothing filtered that bloom out. No product resolved it. The bacteria multiplied until they had consumed the surplus of dissolved organic compounds that came with the new setup, and then the population collapsed back down to what the remaining supply could sustain, and the water went clear. That is the entire behavior of the system in 1 week, visible in your own living room, and it tells you that cloudiness appears when food appears and disappears when food runs out. And here's why your filter cannot solve it, which is the part that changes how you think about the whole problem. Mechanical filtration works by physical exclusion. Water passes through a medium with a certain pore size, and anything larger than that pore is trapped while anything smaller passes straight through. A free-floating bacterium is roughly 1 to 2 microns across. Fine filter floss traps particles down to somewhere around 20 microns, and a good polishing pad might reach 10. The organism causing your cloudiness is an order of magnitude smaller than the finest media you can practically run, and it passes through your filter as freely as the water itself does. You are not failing to catch it because your filter is weak or dirty or too small. You cannot catch it, and no amount of stronger filtration will change that, because you are trying to strain something that is smaller than the holes. That is also exactly why the bottled clarifier works and why it stops working. A clarifier is a flocculant, meaning a compound that causes fine suspended particles to clump together into aggregates large enough for your filter to catch. It is a genuinely clever bit of chemistry, and it does what it says. What it does not do is reduce the dissolved organic carbon in your water by any amount at all. So the food supply is untouched, the surviving population rebuilds against it within days, and you reach for the bottle again. The same applies to a UV sterilizer, which kills free-floating organisms as water passes the lamp and which works extremely well while it is switched on. Turn it off and the cloudiness returns, because the substrate that was feeding the bloom is still sitting in the water. So the actual question is not how to remove the organisms, it is how to remove what they are eating. Dissolved organic carbon and dissolved nutrients get into your water from uneaten food, from fish waste, from decomposing plant matter, and from anything else breaking down in the tank. And once dissolved, they stay dissolved until something biological consumes them, or you dilute them with a water change. A fast-growing plant with its roots in the water column is one of the very few things that consumes them continuously. Watercress does this unusually well, and the reason is worth stating plainly. It is a genuinely semi-aquatic plant. Its scientific name is Nasturtium officinale. It grows naturally in shallow-flowing freshwater streams, with its roots submerged and its foliage above the surface, and it has been cultivated commercially in exactly that arrangement for 2 centuries. So you are not persuading a houseplant to tolerate water. You are giving an aquatic plant the conditions it evolved for. It grows quickly, it roots from a cutting within days, and it develops a dense, fibrous root mass that does 2 jobs at once. The roots strip dissolved nitrogen and phosphorus out of the water column continuously, which starves both the bacterial and the algal populations of what they need to reproduce. And that root mass carries its own biofilm, which physically traps and biologically processes fine suspended material that drifts into it, which is precisely the mechanism used in constructed wetland water treatment. That combination is what quietly costs people the most, because the standard response to cloudy water makes it worse. Somebody sees haze, concludes the tank is dirty, and responds with intensity. They do an enormous water change, strip and rinse every piece of filter media, vacuum the substrate aggressively, and scrub the hardscape. What that actually does is destroy a large share of the fixed bacterial colony that was holding the system stable, stir every settled organic particle back into suspension where it dissolves, and hand the free-floating population a larger food supply and less competition than it had before. So the tank goes cloudier, which reads as confirmation that it was even dirtier than they thought, so they clean harder. That loop can run for months. They were not doing anything wrong. They were told for years that cloudy water is dirty water, and it is not. It is fed water. So here is exactly what to buy, and where you buy it matters more than most people realize. Go to the fresh produce section, not the garden center, and pick up a bunch of watercress with the stems intact. Look for stems that already show small white root nubs at the leaf nodes, because those will root in days. There is a real advantage to sourcing from the food aisle that is worth stating. Ornamental plants sold in garden centers are frequently treated with systemic insecticides that are lethal to shrimp and snails at very low concentrations. Produce grown for human consumption is regulated for exactly that, which makes a supermarket herb or salad plant a substantially safer starting point for a tank containing invertebrates. Rinse it under the tap regardless, but the risk profile is not the same. That is the plant. And this is the point where the setup decides whether it does anything. Rooting, mounting, water temperature, and the harvest schedule are what separate a plant that strips your water continuously for months from one that rots in a fortnight. The full playbook covers the setup alongside the feeding and filtration decisions that determine what is dissolved in your water to begin with. The link is in the description and the top pinned comment, or scan the code on your screen, and it will take you there directly. Take 4 or 5 healthy stems and trim the bottom of each at an angle just below a node. Strip the lowest leaves so nothing green sits underwater. Stand them in a glass of clean water on a bright windowsill, changing the water every couple of days, and within 5 to 10 days you will have a visible white root system. Only then does it go on the tank. Mount it so that the roots are submerged and the growing tips and leaves stay in the air permanently. A small mesh basket or a plastic pot with the base cut out, hooked over the back rim, works perfectly. If you run a hang-on-back filter, the filter box is the ideal position, because the roots sit directly in moving water, and moving water is what this plant grows in naturally. Keep the roots clear of any impeller, and put a coarse foam pre-filter on your intake if fine roots are likely to reach it. Then harvest, on a schedule, because harvesting is the entire point. Cut the top third of the growth off every week or two once it is established, and take it out of the room. Every nutrient the plant absorbed is bound up in that tissue, and if you leave it to grow indefinitely, and then let old stems yellow and fall into the water, all of it dissolves straight back into the tank you took it from. You can eat what you cut, which is a reasonable bonus, and cuttings root again immediately, so the supply renews itself. 1 point on scale, because it decides whether you see a result. Uptake is proportional to how much plant you are actually growing. So 4 or 5 stems on a large, heavily stocked tank will do very little that you can measure. Think in terms of a massive plant rather than a number of cuttings. Aim to cover a reasonable stretch of your back rim rather than one corner, and give the roots a few months to build volume before you judge it. The plant you see above the water is not the working part. The root mass below it is, and that is the part that takes time. If you already own a UV sterilizer or a bottle of clarifier, keep both and keep using them. Run the plant alongside and use the UV or the clarifier to handle the visible bloom while the plant works on the food supply underneath it. Over the following weeks, you should find that the intervals between needing them stretch out. And that is the signal to watch for. At some point, you will notice you have not switched the lamp on in a month. I want to be straightforward about the limitations because accurate information is worth more than a clean sales pitch. The first is temperature. Watercress is a cool water plant that grows best somewhere between the mid-50s and low 70s Fahrenheit, so in a tropical tank held at the high 70s, it will grow more slowly and will not live as long. Treat it as a crop rather than a permanent fixture. Replace it every few months from a fresh supermarket bunch, and for warmer tanks, consider mint, basil, or the base of a spring onion, all of which root in water readily and tolerate heat better. The second is speed. This addresses the dissolved food supply, which means it works on a timescale of weeks rather than hours, and it will not rescue you from an acute bloom that started yesterday. For that, you still reduce feeding immediately, and for a green water bloom specifically, a total blackout for 3 to 4 days remains the fastest fix. The third is disposal and responsibility. Watercress establishes readily in the wild, so never put trimmings or unwanted plants into a stream, pond, or drain. They go in the bin or the compost, and if you are considering water spinach, which is a far more aggressive nutrient stripper, and is sold in many Asian supermarkets, check your local regulations first, because it is legally restricted in a number of places precisely because it grows so well. There's also one thing this does not do, which is worth naming so you are not disappointed. It has no effect on cloudiness caused by fine mineral particles, which is the dusty haze you get after adding a new substrate or disturbing sand. That is genuine suspended matter. It is large enough for your filter to catch, and floss or a polishing pad clears it within a day. Now, here is the mistake that keeps this problem alive in most tanks, and it is the same mistake every time. Overcleaning. The instinct when water looks dirty is to clean everything, and that instinct is precisely backwards here, because the visible haze is a population feeding on dissolved compounds, and your cleaning is what puts those compounds into solution and removes the competition. When your water goes cloudy, the correct response is to change almost nothing. Feed less, leave the filter closed. Do a modest water change rather than an enormous one. Remove any visible decaying material by hand. And then wait, because a bacterial bloom in a stable tank almost always resolves on its own within 1 to 2 weeks as the surplus is consumed. The tank is not asking you to intervene harder. It is telling you that something was added faster than it could be processed, and the only lasting answer is to reduce what goes in and increase what continuously takes it out. None of this is a new idea. Around 1,000 years ago, farmers in the lake basin of central Mexico built raised growing beds directly into shallow water, known as chinampas, where crops grew in soil beds, with their roots reaching into the lake itself. Those systems produced enormous yields for centuries, and the reason they stayed productive is that the plants were continuously drawing nutrients out of the water while the water continuously delivered more. It is the same arrangement as a bunch of supermarket watercress on the rim of your tank, at a different scale, and it is the same principle that runs every constructed wetland treating wastewater today. The knowledge is not hidden and not disputed. It simply arrives in a plastic bag from the salad aisle with a recipe on the back, and nobody in that shop has any idea it belongs in an aquarium. If you want the complete system rather than just this one plant, the full aquarium playbook covers the setup step by step, the harvest schedule that turns absorption into removal, the feeding and stocking limits that determine how much dissolved organic load you generate, and what to do about each specific type of cloudiness when it appears. It is all in one place, in the order you actually need it. The link is in the description and in the top pinned comment, and you can scan the code on your screen to go straight to it. And if this changed how you think about hazy water, give it a like and subscribe, because there is a great deal more where this came from.